means of getting that out. We will follow the construct to the accommodations policies at work. I think some kind of, we're more of a blend of Park and Smarter Balanced and one state and the entities in the Pacific that aren't aligned, they're doing their own assessments. So figuring out how to make it seamless in participation policies for teachers and as part of the same training will be tricky. On the content though, I think alternate assessment for this group of kids has been a test in search of a construct for the last 10 years. If I look at all 50 states, the decisions that they've made about what content is going to be assessed in their alternate assessment have been at best based on an educational logic of what we're learning about how these kids build competence when we teach them academics. We're very, very early. I think our two projects are approaching content in fairly different ways, even though the underlying beliefs about the kids are pretty similar. And I think it's a really good thing because we need to capitalize on these 4 years of funding to work hard to develop an understanding of what it looks like both when the kids are taught well and when they're assessed well. So Gay, I'm not one, and I don't want Park and Smarter Balanced to tell me what to assess right now. So that's an area where I would be one of the people who would take 5 years to get confidence that we're getting it right, because I don't think any of us have it right now for alternate assessment. And I think having our two teams working hard on it differently is a really good thing.
And our approach with our learning map approach to assessing students is quite a bit different than Smarter Balanced or Park. And I'm not sure we would come to agreement as to content, but we might. But I'm not sure that's as critical. I'm not sure that has to happen. But maybe it would be nice, but it's not necessary per se. We are assessing the standards, and we're doing it in slightly different ways.
And we're building the defense of what we're choosing, and that's and that will be up for scrutiny. So I suspect some of what they're doing will just cast new light on things that we've never thought of before, and some of what we've been doing. But so I actually think it's an asset right now.
Some of the critical things are how much can we assess? Because obviously, if you look at Common Core, and we've created links to Common Core, we have to define in our test specs on the summative actually how much of it we feel like assessing, or feel is important to assess, and over what time period, so that we cover more of it. Maybe 1 year we cover X number of standards, the next year we continue that, because you can't assess everything in 1 year, I do not believe. So we will be discussing test specs and things like that as we move down the road to try to determine what's important, what are the most important to start with.
It's not easy. I'm looking at some of our state partners, and you all know what our lives are like collectively. We've got the state curriculum people poring over this stuff. We've got, every once in a while we think we're on the path, and we think we kind of know what we're doing, and we realize we missed something important, and we step back and we get into our groups and think again. It's very heavy lifting around the content right now. In the end, we're building on what research there is. We're building on a hypothesized curricular sequence that will help for all kids, that will help us prioritize across the years. We'll be building on what it looks like when we take the content out and work with teachers and kids before we get to the point of even item development. It is the most important work we're doing right now. I would say it's all content every day. And it's very, very difficult work. So, anybody else have an opinion about same or different content specs or definitions at this point across the floor? Is there somebody really smart out there who knows more than we do? I think it is a matter of slogging through this and working with the teachers and the parents and trying the models and being transparent. And next year we'll know more, and the year after that we'll know more. And it's hard. So.
I did change
Oh,
it.
good.
I'm fast.
Oh, well, I'm first. We're similar also in that we're both using evidence-centered design principles. And so I saw Renee come in at one point, Renee Cometto. Okay. The SRI team has worked with some of our states before and some of you as well, and we're learning with them as well. They're in a way victims of us stepping back and saying we need to know more for us to even provide guidance to them. But they have been starting to build the design patterns that some of you might have said. Beauty of them is that the potential for universal design, for ways that we can modify the presentation or the response in ways that doesn't affect the construct, are laid out for us as they work with each content target that we're developing before we even get to item specs. So that's been a learning for me. I think their work has been really good. We'll give them better guidance on exactly what the parameters are, and I'm laughing at some of the folks who are doing that work right now, laughing at me. So we think that that design model actually makes the work easier. If we end up tagging on an electronic system, we'll have the key identifiers built right into the design patterns underlying every assessment target. That's been pretty exciting.
I've said already that we're all using universal design, so I don't think I need to repeat that. But what some of the unique things in our learning map is that we've created, we are in the process of creating multiple pathways. So it's part of the thinking about how students can represent what they know and can do. And if you take, for example, a hearing impaired individual and you're trying to teach that individual phonics, you're not going to take the typical pathway. You're going to take another pathway. They might learn phonics, but they're going to learn it in a different way. Vibrations, etc. I'm not an expert in that area, so. But we have created and built into our learning map these, we call them multiple pathways versus alternates. And so we engage professionals to look at these alternates, and that'll take place in June in our, so that have we created the right alternate pathway, multiple pathways? And did we do it right? Can you see other ways that students can not go down the typical pathway? All of us learn differently. I always wind up maybe learning more conceptually, and some people, like was brought up this morning, might learn procedurally and then make that leap to the conceptual understanding. So we're trying to take into account some of these things. And because you represent it in one way, or we're trying to allow, as Rachel referred to a little while ago, different ways of representing their responses. So we're allowing, we have different representations, different ways to express. So we are trying to be as inclusive as we can with this population. And it's very difficult to make sure that you've included, have thought of all the different ways that are possible, or most of the ways, because you can't do everything. So we're trying to think through that, and that probably is another thing that keeps us awake at night.
Yeah.
Keeps me awake, but I don't call people at 3 a.m., so. We're
Who
also.
does?
Yeah, I'd like to sometimes. Did you do that? What we're trying to do too is create student profiles, because to do what we're trying to do, you can't do it on the fly. We have to have data about all our students and into our technology, and the technology is going to be smart enough to ensure that the students get the right accommodation should they need it. It's going to be smart enough to take them down the alternate pathway should they need it. Visually impaired individual, mostly sensory issues, at least we're starting with those, moving down the alternate or multiple pathways. But we can't have people making decisions at the last minute on a computer. Everybody would freak out, and it wouldn't be very user-friendly. So we're trying to stay away from those types of things.
Are there any comments or that you'd like to have about accommodations framework or accommodations monitoring for these two, or give a little input while you've got the chance? Okay.
You've started getting a sense of DLM's technology infrastructure is really sophisticated, and I'm sure they hope elegant. It sounds elegant in the conceptual framework. NICSIC will be using technology to deliver the assessment. Most of our states do believe that many of the students could interact directly with the computer. We also, though, are going to be much less sophisticated and in our tech delivery. It will be primarily a delivery, except that we hope to experiment with some of the innovative items like what the park representative was talking about this morning. We will be doing pretty extensive tryouts with students and teachers, cognitive labs to understand really what would work. And we also want to make sure that the infrastructure in our states, districts, and schools will support what we're doing. So I think I'm going to reserve my time on this one unless some of our states want to comment on that. I know we have a few states that are already delivering their alternative assessment via technology, and they're heavily involved with our technology committee to make sure that we don't not take advantage of opportunities that we could for direct interaction with students. But we've got a lot to do before we make a final decision. We'll be going out, well, I'll leave it at that. And the bells and whistles are over here, so I think I'll turn it back to Evelyn.
We're developing two types of assessment, one an embedded, which would be given throughout the year, and another being a summative assessment. Our intent is this, I'm trying to think, about June, is to start doing, as Rachel just stated, start doing cognitive labs with students and seeing how they interact with the technology. Can they handle it? We'll video them. We'll have a cognitive psychologist. We have one on staff that works with us to ensure that we're doing things appropriately. They can access not only the technology, but how are the items. We're in the process of creating, starting to create in the next couple of months some templates that are ECD type things that are very similar to Renee's stuff, but it's based on different item types versus it takes what Renee did and we are gearing it towards different item types and creating templates to the different item types for our item writers so that those items map to our map. That's good language. aligned to our map and the nodes on the map. So we're taking that approach. Our embedded assessment, I can just add to and just say that our intent is to inform instruction, as everybody's will do. It's adaptive in that it will make, it's based on Bayesnet psychometrics, so it will be based on the probabilities of getting a series of nodes correct on our map. This is, when I can, if you go to our website, you can see like what learning maps are. Talking about it in the abstract is probably boring to try to describe a map, but we have a little 3-minute video and you can kind of see what a map is and how we're going about it. But we feel the embedded is the critical piece. The summative is something we are developing in terms of, you know, we know ESEA is a requirement that we have to have a test that we can measure the growth issues and be peer review compliant, etc. We think the important things will be in the embedded to change instruction and what teachers do with students every day, and that's a no-brainer. So.
Since we're talking about delivery, do you want to mention the availability of paper pencil?
We will have the ability to do both. We hope as many as possible will use it online. We realize that it's not possible for everybody to do it online. We also know that we will have to have a certain amount of manipulatives kits that we're going to probably have to have for everyone, and they're going to have to be a little different than, you know, the ones you punch out, because they're not going to be big enough for this population to deal with. So there'll be like blocks and various other things. So we can't afford to give out a monster kit because that's just not effective. So as we develop, we're going to have to determine what that kit might look like and how it can be cost effective to send out to all our states. We'll be pilot testing what works, what doesn't work, that kind of stuff. But there will be a way for teachers to deliver it online and then enter the responses back into the technology so they get the same reports anybody else would get. Sure.
Another thing I'm struggling with is remember smart analysis.
We're trying to figure out how to handle what's coming as a state. And I'm thinking about our teachers, and a lot of the teachers who work with our kids on all also work with kids that are taking a general assessment. So are the, I guess part of what I'm wondering is, are the alternate assessments that you're conceptualizing and building right now, and I know it's probably hard, and I like diversity of grades because I do think we're going to learn a lot. And I think that the other assessments are going to learn a lot from what we're doing. And you talked at all, a couple questions, you talked at all with Smarter and Park about item sharing where possible. Secondly, where are the boundaries involved? Where does it begin and end? Because Smarter is doing an adaptive test, you know, moving on down to the grade. So how do we know when a child is moving out of the alt? Because how do we see strengths and weaknesses? Can you see strengths and weaknesses? And how do we know when a child is actually moving into the other form of assessment? Does that make any sense? I mean, there's too many questions at once.
No, it starts now.
I'll answer that and then remind me to answer the question about paper. Okay. Smarter Balanced is using the same hypothesized curricular sequence in the learning progression frameworks
as we think about how different parts of the content develop for typical kids across within and across the grades. In the adaptive tests of the future, as we said this morning, that this will not be your father's Oldsmobile. It won't be that we'll sample the domain generally at each grade level, and then we'll somehow have this sense that there's gradedness in that. We'll actually be following this content, this concept that starts in 3rd grade, goes to 4th, goes to 5th, and then stops. And this one that started in 5th grade, goes to 6th grade, stops for a year and picks up in 8th grade, and how they interact. In other words, I'd like to think that all 4 assessments will be based more on a conception of, at least hypothesized, what the content really is that kids are learning grade to grade, and not simply a sampling of kind of reading, kind of math, which is kind of what we've been doing, okay? So given that, and given what I think all 4 projects are doing to be thoughtful about the claims that we're willing to make from each grade level assessment, I'd like to think that perhaps there will be kids where we'll say, you know, on this content, by the end of 5th grade, they did really well. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll transfer that now over here. So there isn't an easy answer to that question. The good news, though, is that if all 4 of these assessments succeed in shifting the way we measure what kids can know and do from a content-based perspective instead of a statistical base only, or that is said to represent the content, that maybe for the first time we'll have a better understanding of it. I actually think that will be more important for kids with disabilities or low-performing kids for whatever reason in the general assessment. Because if I can say, if he's struggling here, don't give him something from over here that leads to a different outcome and drill him on it in the hopes that somehow over here he'll get better. As long as we've had a general sampling of the content in the general assessment, out of level